Hi! There's a lot of interest and noise doing the rounds about hydrogen, its role in the future energy system and its role in the transition. This short presentation should clarify the hydrogen conversation by giving the context in which decisions are to be made if we're serious about keeping climate change in check. There's a lot of information in this presentation, so don't be concerned if it's a bit much. You can always look it over when you have more time later. The International Energy Agency, or IEA, a well-known organization of global standing, in May this year published an extremely important report, Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector. This is a particularly important report because the IEA is traditionally oil and gas biased, is very much a business as usual organization, and the organization is listened to globally. The report says much too little is being done by everyone for anywhere near the 1.5-degree scenario. Doing enough is possible, but hard work, and it needs to start today. And the report lays out a roadmap how it may be done. It clearly states the need to stop exploring for and stop subsidizing oil and gas. So what is this path we need to take to net zero? This graph shows our global emissions if we pursue the current policies, the STEP scenario, and the inadequate reduction if all current nations' pledges are fulfilled. This lazy path to net zero starts slowly and accelerates. But the path that's required for the promised carbon budget starts quickly and then tails off as decarbonization becomes more difficult. This red bit in between the two curves is by how far the easy route misses the carbon budget to get to 1.5 degrees. To get this right, we need a serious emissions drop by 2030. It can be done with current technology, but not with procrastination. On to the role of hydrogen. Hydrogen is an abundant element, a building block of water and the smallest, lightest atom in the universe. As a gas, it's not so abundant, and it does not turn to liquid until 250 degrees C below zero. In the context of net zero emissions and climate change response, hydrogen is an energy carrier, and only an energy carrier. It's only as clean as the energy you use to make it. It's clean to get energy out, whether by burning or with a fuel cell as electricity. It's easy to transport in gas pipelines, though this costs rather more energy than moving electricity. But the pipelines are smaller than equivalent power cables. And hydrogen is great for long-term storage, if you have a place for it. Cycling it into and out of a storage place costs about 30% of its energy content. Once again, it's only as clean as the energy used to make it. The hydrogen economy is a term often used and is a misnomer. I quote the EIA's head of energy technology, Timur Gül. I think if you're aiming towards net zero emissions, you don't look for building a hydrogen economy. You look for a decarbonized energy sector. A little about efficiency, a subject often touched upon. For transport, in the future renewable energy world, a hydrogen car has 1/3 of the energy efficiency of an electric one. A synthetic fuel car about half of that again, so 1/6 of an electric battery vehicle. For heating, even though hydrogen has great burning efficiency, it should of course not be compared with gas, but with the proper net zero alternative, an electric heat pump, which is 2.5 times more efficient than hydrogen. So how much hydrogen are we using now? At the moment, globally, hydrogen uses 2% of the world's primary energy supply and 6% of the world's natural gas, and would use 8% if coal were replaced. This is before we start doing all sorts of nice new green things with hydrogen. At the moment, almost all hydrogen is made with fossil fuels, but there are better ways. There's only one hydrogen gas, but depending on how we got this gas, so what type of energy and what emissions were required to get the hydrogen, we differentiate types of hydrogen, each one named with a color. Many colors are used differently by different people, but we'll look at the main three, beginning with green. Green hydrogen is made with renewable energy through a process called electrolysis, which is over 80% efficient, and there are no emissions produced from this process. Green is what everyone agrees we will need in the end, because it's the only sustainable variety. Brown or grey hydrogen is made from oil or natural gas, usually by a steam reforming process during which CO2 is emitted to the atmosphere in the same amounts as if you were burning oil and gas. So for the same energy content, grey hydrogen emits 20% more CO2 than natural gas. And if made from coal, these emissions are much greater still. For blue hydrogen, we take brown hydrogen or grey hydrogen and then try to do something better with the CO2 emissions from this process rather than just letting them fly. We call this somewhat experimental process CCS or CCUS, carbon capture and storage. If it works well, it captures around 80% of the total emissions from the process. This captured CO2 is then stored underground, where we hope it stays for 10,000 years, because that's roughly how long it takes to mineralize and become harmless. For now, 2 points to remember are: blue hydrogen is not net zero, and it's not a proven effective process anywhere near the required scale. Cost and price. We'll look at the comparable cost of hydrogen. The price of hydrogen will be determined by carbon pricing in the end. Considering there is no real blue hydrogen and still very little green hydrogen, this would seem a difficult question. Surprisingly, those in the know and in the business all seem to agree. Any concern about the cost of green hydrogen comes from misinformation and industry bias, not from analysis and understanding. The best estimate from IRENA, the well-respected renewable energy agency, is that by 2030 the cost of green hydrogen will be the same as or lower than the cost of grey and blue hydrogen, looking for example at Scottish wind power for production. Some of the big industries have explicit targets to make this cost parity happen. So already by 2030, green hydrogen will be the cheapest hydrogen around. A different take from PricewaterhouseCoopers, based on solar generation on the Arabian Peninsula in the UAE, also shows price parity by 2030 and an even lower cost by 2050. There are other cost pictures which imply a different story, the ones I've seen typically based on inadequate representation. Hydrogen has one particularly important role to play in the new world of renewable energy, and I'll quickly explain why this is important. Renewable energy systems are intermittent. They produce energy, mainly electricity, when sun, wind, waves, tides are around, but not at other times. This leads to a mismatch between energy supply and energy demand. For short-term daily cycles, there are multiple solutions, but for the long-term seasonal mismatch, hydrogen storage can play a big and important role. Let's have a look at what the main uses and potential uses of hydrogen are. Currently, hydrogen is used mainly for industrial needs. Where it is used depends mainly on availability of storage and is typically used and turned into other products near where it's made. This means that where we choose to use hydrogen for the transition, it'll almost all be in addition to the current use. And because we already need a lot of renewable power, this leads to the most important rule, and one on which there is general agreement. This is the need to electrify wherever possible. Only where that is prohibitively expensive or not feasible should hydrogen play a role. And of course, we need to reduce our energy need first. During and after the transition, these are 6 of the important areas of potential use being discussed. Seasonal storage? Yes, this is an important role for hydrogen to play. It could well be that storage in old natural gas fields is a way to go. Renewable energy grid stability? Yes, by both using excess energy when the sun shines and the wind blows to make hydrogen and store it, and by turning hydrogen back into power when there's no sun or no wind. Industrial application, where electricity is insufficient? Yes, though more and more technologies are around which allow direct electricity to be used in industrial processes. Industrial chemicals? Yes, for some products like ammonia this will be required. In areas like plastics, maybe revisiting the real need could also prove to be a powerful tool. Transport? For shipping, green hydrogen as well as ammonia or methanol derived from it are likely fuels of the future. For road and rail transport, the applications for hydrogen are specific and limited, as I discuss in the next section. Heating? Unlikely. Even though burning hydrogen in domestic boilers is being suggested as an easy drop-in solution, it's highly inefficient when compared not with gas but with alternatives such as electric heat pumps on renewable energy. Burning hydrogen, other than as a niche solution, can slow down or even derail a timely transition. There is unnecessary confusion over the role of hydrogen in transport, but first we'll cover some basic ground rules. The goal in decarbonising, so the first line of approach, is to minimise energy use. Just converting the things we have to a different fuel is not enough. We ended up with our system through the market economy. Markets are often described as efficient, but that's an entirely different context of efficiency. The market economy maximizes consumer expense and externalities because this maximizes business profits and growth. An efficient market economy maximizes individual financial gain at the expense of society as a whole. It's good to take a step back and look at current actual needs and desires and keep an eye on some of those unwanted consequences of the current system. With transport, we must work towards changing the modes we use. This will reduce emissions, energy consumption and cost, while improving our quality of life. Not all green transport modes are cheaper, but the unequal impact in different markets is a critical part of the problem. We could actually ship wheat today with zero emissions from Argentina to Europe, and the price of bread in Europe will increase by less than half a cent. That causes little concern. However, the cost of shipping will increase threefold, and this causes a big problem for the shipper. The cost of polluting must be charged such that cheap shipping is over and clean shipping becomes the norm. This will totally upset the shipping market, but have little impact on the end user. A lot of modern-day air transport is heavily marketed, but of little value. Up to a medium range of around 1,500 kilometers, high-speed rail travel can be cleaner, cheaper, and quicker. For unavoidable long-range flights, the jury is out. With more high-speed rail, fewer flights overall are needed. The path to decarbonize air travel is by a modal shift to rail, reducing the number of flights. Then remaining flights must be cleaned up. Shipping fleets have a lifespan of around 25 years. Therefore, to get to net zero by 2050, all new ships must be decarbonized from now onwards. The choice of decarbonization method is one of storage and availability, efficiency and practicality. In Scotland, for example, green electricity and hydrogen could be made available almost anywhere. For coastal shipping and ferries, battery and hydrogen seems to be the primary energy carriers. For smaller ferries, the break-even time for a battery vessel compared with diesel is shown to be only around 5 years. Larger and small hydrogen vessels are also under construction, and some flexibility may be built in as electric drive is used by both. For ocean-going shipping, several fuels are being pursued, but ammonia, hopefully made from green hydrogen, is a likely candidate. Fleet renewals must be made low emissions, through carbon tax or otherwise. For rail transport, the choice is clear. Electrification is far better than hydrogen for all but specific low-frequency routes and an occasional fill-in hydrogen locomotive. There is some UK-specific uncertainty about the cost of track electrification, but this is known effective answers. That means there's no excuse to not pull out all the stops and go full on for track electrification, replacement of diesel locomotives, and taking on more freight and passengers from the road network. So there is a need to massively increase the speed of track electrification, train electrification, a modal shift from road to rail, and the construction of some niche rail hydrogen infrastructure. Road fleet depreciation is around 10 years, so ensuring new vehicle fleets are zero emissions now will help us towards the challenging 2030 decarbonization goal. Due to the energy efficiency of hydrogen, electric vehicles are better for light and short medium distance transport. These fleets often have the option of overnight charging, which helps. Also, for heavy so-called last mile transport, electric is often the best choice and already available up to 24 tons. For long distance, both hydrogen and electric are likely players, and so both infrastructures must be massively built. Overhead electric lines for lorries may even be an option. So we need to build the infrastructure, make all fleet renewals emissions free, and work on a modal shift from road to rail. Much discussion and many decisions relating to the energy transition seem surprisingly short-sighted, ineffective and incorrect. it's worth looking quickly at some of the issues at play to see where this comes from. Many analyses would fail under basic scientific scrutiny, but little of that is applied. Here are a few pointers of misguided drivers used in many published pieces. Decarbonizing is complex, but not nearly as complex as some want you to believe. Comparisons show a timeline, but fail to adjust underlying parameter uncertainty in the same timeline. Forecasting is a skill, it's not an opinion. Carbon pricing. Typically, comparisons fail to take reasonable future carbon pricing into account, which must be punitive towards emissions. Incorrect comparison, for example, falsely assuming like for like as the expected future case. Ignoring opportunity cost. There's only one amount of money to be invested. Where is this best invested? For example, direct capture typically fails on this criterion. The assumption that people do or don't want something without the relevant context. The suggestion that it's too expensive, without clarity on who this expense is for. Is it for that particular industry or for everyone, and in which context? Aberdeen is a specifically oil-biased place and has been resisting industry transition for more than a decade. Its hydrogen strategy is a good example, and while a hydrogen strategy is an excellent idea on its own, the Aberdeen flavour reeks of petroleum and looks to embed oil emissions for decades to come, while delaying the long overdue decommissioning of this polluting industry. The hydrogen strategy of Aberdeen suggests that hydrogen is essential, progressive and clean, while the core of the strategy is based on ineffective hydrogen applications, a reliance on fossil-based hydrogen, and the long-term embedding of petroleum energy industry and infrastructure. Read the detail of the slide at your leisure later. The acute interest in hydrogen stems from the realizations of oil industry management that change and decline are coming. After successfully resisting climate action for decades, a transition momentum is building. The remaining areas for growth for the industry are single-use plastics and grey hydrogen. So to counter the threat of green hydrogen, so much effort goes into co-selling grey hydrogen together with unproven CCS as blue hydrogen. This ignores the fact that green hydrogen can be made available sooner, cheaper, and better than blue, real net zero. The only real problem with green hydrogen is it's not made from fossil fuels. This does not mean there is no legitimate interest in CCS. Rather, the problem is, let's not waste CCS on the fabrication of hydrogen where much better alternatives exist. The UK government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution is an example of poorly understood industry-promoted ideas, which sound green but often fail on scrutiny. Nearly three-quarters of them will not achieve anything near the required transition, not the jobs, not the health and social benefits, not the reduced cost to society. But they will further embed some already well-embedded industries in a climate disastrous future. Number one, advancing offshore wind. Sounds good, but as it's already cost competitive, is going to happen anyway. Why not also invest in other clean energy systems? Driving the growth of low-carbon hydrogen. As we've seen, low-carbon hydrogen is oil industry hydrogen and not net zero. Green hydrogen is what the drive must be for. Delivering new and advanced nuclear power. Nuclear energy is baseload and so largely incompatible with renewables. It's expensive and focuses also on nuclear fusion, which is no closer to reality now than when I was at school 50 years ago. Accelerating the shift to zero emissions vehicles. This is an important effort, but a like-for-like car stimulus without focus on a modal shift, of course, will fail the net zero aims. 5. Green public transport, cycling and walking. This is a strong positive point. Though little shines through by way of infrastructure mandates, so far I'm hopeful. Number 6. Jet zero and green ships. Green shipping is good, but most flights are wasteful. What about enhanced focus on electrified rail and modal shift to rail? 7. Greener buildings. This could be very valuable depending on whether this is for new or retrofit relating to carbon content or materials, lifetime energy or emissions. Circularity of building materials. Number 8, investing in carbon capture, usage and storage. Potentially this is very important, but how will the CCS be used? If it's non-zero emissions, it'll be wasted on hydrogen. Number 9, protecting our natural environment. This is an excellent idea. Even if this does not seem to be the government's direction of travel at the moment, I hope that will come. Number 10, green finance and innovation. This could result in some really good things and some really bad things too. So for now, I'll remain hopeful. In conclusion, the path ahead is narrow, but the direction is clear. The non-fossil fuel industry is aware, has the technologies necessary, and is waiting for the starting gun from governments, whether in the form of carbon tax, a coherent plan, incentives, or market demand. This probably works best globally, but doesn't have to. So let's maximize renewable energy production. We'll need all of it. Then reduce energy use, maximize the modal shifts, and electrify wherever we can. And finally, green hydrogen is the only hydrogen for net zero, and we need quite a lot of it. Please share this understanding and let's finally help this transition happen. For more information, contact me at oceanvalley.co.uk. Thank you.